Um, there we go. So that I can post this for those who aren't able to join, they can listen. And I will also be sending out the slides, presentation slides that I'll have so folks can have that. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. My name is Claire Figner, and I am the Coastal Habitat Projects Coordinator for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And we're all here today to chat about the Coastal Zone Management, Habitat Protection and Restoration Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Funding Competition. That's a mouthful. So when I'm talking, I might just refer to it as CZM bill funding for right now. So great. So what I'm planning on talking about today is doing an overview of this funding opportunity to highlight a few things that are new in this cycle, reviewing program priorities and eligibility, the application process and timeline this time, some specific priorities for the different project types, and then talk about next steps, and then open up for questions from all of you. So first of all, I wanted to just kind of explain how DLCD came to be administering this funding, because it seems somewhat of an odd connection there. But first of all, the bipartisan infrastructure law came from the Biden administration, that is funding a whole range of infrastructure and climate resilience funding opportunities, but there's a particular stream of that funding that goes to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for coastal climate resilience suite of funding opportunities. One of those particular funding opportunities is specifically earmarked for coastal management programs to implement climate resilience projects. And Oregon's coastal management program, let me rephrase that. The Department of Land Conservation and Development is the lead agency for Oregon's coastal management program. So that is why DLCD is involved. And through this funding, the OCMP and DLCD have to be the main applicants. So that's why we are reaching out to all of you, our partners along the coast, to help bring in projects. For one reason, DLCD doesn't own or manage land, so we really are relying on all of you to get this funding to Oregon, to your great projects that are funding coastal and climate resilience projects. So diving into this particular funding, and the purpose is to increase resilience through landscape scale habitat restoration and conservation in coastal ecosystems, and promote coastal resilience in underserved coastal communities, as well as those most vulnerable to climate impacts. The total funding and timeline for this bill funding is approximately $207 million allocated over 5 years for this competitive project funding. In the first year of this program, NOAA awarded about $50 million. This year, the second year of this funding, they're anticipating it to be the largest of the largest pot of money that they're going to allocate out of all 5 years. And that's going to be just about $60 million worth of projects. And there's parallel funding for NERS, and Bree Yadnock is here, the manager of Oregon's one um, National Estuarine Research Reserve this in Oregon. So there's a parallel funding for that program as well through NOAA. So what's new in 2023? Well, first of all, NOAA's Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO for short, is, if you looked at the previous year's NOFO, this time it's much clearer, straightforward, organized, a little bit easier to navigate through. So I definitely recommend reading that thoroughly, because all of the information you need to know is in there. In general, the priorities are the same as last year, so no major shifts in their priorities or how they're funding projects. I mentioned this already, but this is this will be the biggest funding year, and that's primarily because they have an influx of IRA funding, so it's Inflation Reduction Act funding dollars that they're supplementing the bill dollars this year. So that's kind of a one-time thing, why this is going to be the largest funding year out of the 5. Again, NOAA's application process is similar as far as a 2-step process with a letter of intent and then being invited for a full application. They have allowed for additional time, longer time periods to submit, and I'll go over that. DLCD's application process, since the first step of this is to apply to DLCD, because we have a limited number that we can submit, and I'll go all into the process later, but our process is hopefully clearer and more defined as we now had more time to prep for the cycle. And then DLCD, our website, we have a coastal grants website, and here, let me post in the chat if you haven't already visited. There's the link to that website, webpage within DLCD's website. It has all the up-to-date current information about this funding cycle and all the resources that you might need. And also, you've probably seen, but the announcements, but we had one project that was funded in the first cycle, and that was an acquisition project with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and their partners, Mackenzie River Trust, to purchase part of Cape Fellwether in the Central Oregon coast. So those are kind of the highlights and new features this year. So again, the program priorities are similar or the same as last time, the previous cycle, but I'll just quickly review those. They are looking for projects that are shovel ready or reasonably advanced and ready to go if you're awarded funding. That projects that include on the ground implementation have a priority. Projects that factor in anticipated climate change effects, projects that are ecosystem and habitat focused. They look for diversity and geographic distribution of projects, and that's on a national basis, not sort of internal state geographic distribution, but more NOAA is looking at that in a national context. They're looking for a variety of project types, and I'll go into that in a minute, but there's 3 different project types that you can apply for. They're looking for projects to leverage additional funding sources, and also projects that advance equity and inclusion principles. And this cycle, they're looking to designate at least 10% of the competition funding towards projects that target engagement and partnership with underserved communities. there's nothing there. Hold on one second. Let me just open my PowerPoint version. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. I'll give this just a second. But the eligible project types, there's three, as I mentioned. One is on-the-ground restoration projects. Another is restoration planning, engineering, and design. Here we go. Let me just put this in presentation mode for you. Bigger, there we go. So the second is habitat restoration planning, engineering, and design. And the third is land conservation, which is fee purchase or purchase of conservation easements. Another eligibility factor that all projects must comply with is that they're implemented on publicly owned lands. And I've gotten a little more clarity from NOAA this time on the distinction between restoration and restoration planning projects and land conservation projects. So for restoration or restoration planning proposals, those need to take place on public land. It can be owned or controlled. So if maybe they hold a lease or there's some way that that public entity is controlling the property. And that can include federal land, but the federal landowner cannot actually receive any of the funding, but it can occur on federal land. So any kind of public land. Nonprofits, NGOs can receive the funding to implement restoration or restoration planning proposals, as long as, again, that project is on public land. But there's a difference for the land conservation, the acquisition projects. Those can only end up in non-federal public entity ownership. So NGOs or nonprofits or other entities cannot directly receive dollars for acquisition projects and cannot own those lands even temporarily with these funds. There are ways to structure projects where nonprofits are partners and they provide support and technical support and can receive compensations, for that, and can help with a transaction in a buy and hold model. So there are options for nonprofits to be involved in those land conservation projects. And I can go into that more if anybody has any questions about that later at the end. Then additional eligibility criteria. The project has to occur in the Oregon Coastal Management Program's official coastal zone. The project goals of individual projects need to be highlighted in any state, tribal, or regional conservation plans. And eligible applicants, I kind of went into that. Again, DLCD has to be the main applicant, and we are limited to only submit up to 3 letters of intent to NOAA. And so our partners, our sub-applicants, which are all of you, again, have to be non-federal public entities, and nonprofits or NGOs or other entities can also be our partners and sub-applicants. And again, non-federal public entity are state agencies, federally recognized Indian tribes, local governments, and local and regional entities. And then another eligibility criteria is that there has to be a public benefit through this work. So that's partly why the restoration and restoration planning needs to occur on public lands. And for the land acquisition projects, there needs to be a component of passive public access as part of that. All right, so this year's application process is kind of a maze of steps here, but we can walk through them, and hopefully it clarifies any questions. But NOAA released the NOFO on June 13th. Your letters of intent are due to DLCD because we have to then choose the top 3 out of all the ones submitted. So those are due to DLCD on July 13th. And then we've established a review team that will help evaluate those letters of intent and make recommendations on the top 3 projects to DLCD. And then DLCD will announce which are the top 3 LOIs that we plan to submit to NOAA by August 3rd. And that gives us about a week to work with those partners of those 3 LOIs, of those 3 projects, to make any adjustments to the LOI, make sure you're including everything you can in your budgets, just help bolster that proposal. And then because we are the main applicants, we do have to add a little bit of language, DLCD language into that LOI. So that kind of happens in that last week. And then those LOIs are then due to NOAA by August 14th. Then by October 6th, we should hear from NOAA about which top proposals they have invited to submit full applications. And then we have about 90 days to submit those full applications, which are due on January 10th of 2024. And during that time period, DLCD, our role is really to support partners in development of those full applications. We can provide technical support, kind of just on a needs basis, but it could include mapping or information, editing, review, recommendations, things like that to help all of those applications be the best they can, because we really want all of them to get funded. And then we submit again on January 10th of 2024. And then NOAA anticipates announcing those awards probably late spring or early summer, with an anticipated project start date of August 2024. So that project start date of August can help you also in your, how you're laying out your project timelines and things, because that would be essentially the start of the project. So I wanted to just review some of the letter of intent requirements at this phase. DLCD is asking for everyone to have a pre-application consultation meeting prior to submitting your LOI to DLCD on July 13th. That's really a tool to help you make sure you are getting all the resources, meeting all the eligibility requirements, and that we're providing you all the recommendations that we can. You need to use the LOI template and instructions that are available. All of that is on the website, and you may have received an email from me as well with all of that information. We are using NOAA's LOI template for your submission to DLCD, and there's a checklist and instructions and template all available to you on the website. We've also provided a budget template just as a tool for you to help develop your budgets. So you are using the federal budget categories, expense categories. And then when DLCD has to add in some expenses prior to submitting those LOIs to NOAA, so we can have, we can look at that to have a sort of transparent exchange of information about what's in the budget. But you don't need to submit that with your LOI. Right now, it's just a tool to help you start to create and develop your budgets. Then there's a couple other requirements that we have for acquisition projects submitted with your LOI to DLCD. We would like to see a signed agreement or letter from the willing seller that they are working with you and interested in selling. It can be in the form of a formal purchase and sale agreement or option agreement if you're at that stage. It can also be a letter of intent or just a letter from that willing seller. And then we also are looking for a signed acknowledgement document, or again, letter or whatever form it comes in, but some sort of signed acknowledgement from the proposed non-federal public entity that will be purchasing and holding that property or conservation easement, that they're willing to go through that acquisition for that land in term and abiding by the terms of the application, basically keeping it in conservation status and perpetuity, and that who signs that acknowledgement is actually authorized to make that statement. And then for restoration or restoration planning projects, we'd like to see a signed acknowledgement, again, document, letter, whatever kind of format makes the most sense for you, from the authorized representative or an authorized representative of the public entity that owns or controls the land that project is occurring on, basically to state that they're granting permission for that restoration project or planning project to occur on the land under their ownership or control. And that's actually only necessary if the restoration project is proposed by an entity that doesn't own or control the land. So if it's already a public entity that's proposing that restoration or planning project and it's on land they own or manage or control, you don't need to provide that. But say a nonprofit is proposing the activities on a public entity's project property, then we'd want to see that acknowledgement document provided with the LOI. And all of this is in the LOI checklist and instructions and spelled out, hopefully clear, as well as how to submit the LOI, what date and time specifically, and how to put it all into one PDF and email it instructions. So look for that. Okay, diving a little bit more into project budgets. For each project can be up to $6 million as the top maximum request. NOAA gives some guidelines on kind of the funding ranges that they're looking for the different project types. So they've said that restoration planning typically is from $200,000 to $500,000 per project. Restoration projects from $2 to $6 million, and acquisition from $1 to $4 million. But then they say, you can apply for projects that are above or below those, but they're kind of giving those as target ranges for those different project types. So because this is federal dollars, you may or may not be familiar with BABA. It's kind of a bad acronym, but the Build America, Buy America requirements. I do have a link to some guidance on the website for that, but especially for restoration projects, on the ground restoration projects, those requirements you should really consider in your budget development, because they may increase the cost potentially for restoration projects. And it's basically, in a very simplified nutshell, any metal products that stays like with the land as part of that restoration project has to be sourced within America, produced and sourced in America. So because this is a new requirement, it's anticipated there might be, it might lead to increased costs because everyone will be looking for the same made in America items. And if you have questions on that, please reach out and ask me. But wanted to highlight that for you for your budgets. There is no match requirement for this, but cost sharing, is an important element in NOAA's evaluation criteria. They highlight sort of two types of match that you can provide. One is sort of official match. And if you do provide that or list that in your LOI or application and you're awarded funding, that becomes contractually, you have to contractually actually provide what you say you are going to provide in match. But there's also leveraged funding, which falls into how they evaluate that criteria for cost sharing. And so leveraged funding it's not official match, but it's any other kind of funding, whether it be other federal funding or other partners funding that goes into your larger project. And so talking about all of that is just important as providing actual match because that is not required. So you can think about talking up your leveraged match for sure in your applications. I've mentioned this, but DLCD, because we're the lead agency for Oregon's Coastal Management Program, must serve as the primary applicant. And in general, projects can be up to a 3-year project time period. And for restoration projects, you can include an additional year for restoration monitoring if you choose. Now I'll go into a little more detail on the priorities for each of the different project types. And I'll be pretty quick on this because you can read much more about these priorities within the NOFO. But let me review them quickly with you. So for habitat restoration projects, priority will be given to those that are shown as or identified in other state, tribal, or regional restoration plans, conservation plans, watershed plans, any kind of plan that highlights either your restoration activity or location that you're doing the restoration or any component of your project. They want to see those identified in other plans. They want to see that you're restoring important habitats and connected ecosystem functions and species, that you restore hydrologic connections between habitats that improve ecosystem functions, that it enhances or restores important ecosystem services that support coastal communities, vulnerable populations, or cultural resources, that they include a long-term plan for monitoring specific criteria relevant to achieving your specific project objectives, and then also provide for any engineering or design needs that are still needing to be completed for restoration projects. And then for habitat restoration planning, engineering, and design projects, their priorities are pretty much everything in the restoration criteria as well, except that monitoring plans are not required for the planning side. And that these habitat restoration planning activities should demonstrate how these efforts will support or catalyze subsequent on-the-ground restoration projects. And then lastly, the land conservation projects. Priorities for those will be given to projects that have significant ecological value and have a demonstrated need for protection and can be effectively managed and protected by the entity, proposed entity. They're also looking for projects that are designed to protect properties under imminent threat of conversion, that serve to mitigate the adverse impacts caused by coastal population growth, that reflect that the land conservation project goals, again, are similar to the restoration, that are identified in other regional, tribal, statewide conservation plans, as well as the National Coastal Zone Management Act goals, and that those projects have a high level of project readiness. Great. Okay, that was a lot. But I wanted to go over some next steps and reminders and pointers for you. Really, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that come up. You can email or call me. I'm happy to help navigate questions, and if I can't answer them, I can reach out to Noah and others to find hopefully the answers. And if you haven't already, please be sure to, if you're interested in submitting an LOI, please schedule your pre-application consultation meeting with me. You need to do that prior to submitting your letter of intent. So those are, again, informal meetings just to review your project ideas, make sure you're highlighting all the criteria, and that your project, ensuring your project is eligible so that you're not going through all this effort and then finding out it's not an eligible project. And really, it's a tool for you to be able to submit a strong LOI. Again, I mentioned, but the NOFO really has all of the details, all of the information. Really important to read through that and visit our website, like I mentioned, for additional resources. And I was going to highlight, just looking at the website. Oh, yes, I wanted to also highlight on the website, there's links to all of these resources, but also some frequently asked questions, that BABA fact sheet that I mentioned, links to NOAA's NOFO, so you can have direct access to that, as well as a link to the projects that were awarded, like the list of projects that received funding in the first year of funding. That seems to be helpful since this is a new program to see what kind of projects NOAA did fund in that first round. So there's a link to that list on the DLCD's Coastal Grant webpage. So be sure to check that out. And for restoration or any on-the-ground activities, those must, through the whole process, clear federal environmental compliance, like NEPA and others. So if you are proposing a restoration project or any on-the-ground activities, please reach out to me, because NOAA is just announced that they're scheduling sort of pre-application consultation with their environmental compliance team to review those projects for environmental compliance requirements. And so that is important to do also before submitting an LOI. So please reach out to me, and I may have already reached out to you if I know you're thinking about a restoration project, but that is another important step that NOAA just announced. So and then NOAA has coined this as the summer of money, because there is a lot of, especially NOAA, because that's what I'm most familiar with, but there is a lot of Bill and NOAA funding opportunities that are opening over the next couple months. And so I'm working on kind of creating a list of all of those in one place, and I will send that out to everyone on my distribution list, and all of you, if you're not already on my distribution list, I'll add you. Because I, can help you if you're thinking about a project, but this particular funding opportunity is maybe not the best fit. There may be other NOAA bill funding opportunities that are opening this summer that your project may be a better fit for, that I can help you sort of navigate and get tied into those other funding sources. So I'll send that out, and please, again, feel free to reach out with project ideas, and I can help try to help navigate this crazy summer of funding opportunities and with your projects, because our goal is really to get as many projects funded with all of this opportunity coming for the coast and all of you. So with that, I think I will stop sharing, and I can pull up slides again if somebody wants to look at something again or has a specific question, but so I can see all of you a little better, I will close that. Great. So does anybody have any questions that you want to ask? Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, Erin, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, thank you for doing this. I know you were just recording this, but I had some other team members on our project that couldn't be here today. We will be able to share that? Okay, thank you. And then I would like to schedule a meeting with you to do the pre-app for the LOI.
Yes.
So should we just email you?
Yes, and we already did that.
That counted?
That was that meeting.
Okay,
yes.
I didn't know if that counted or not. Okay, then
yes.
we're good.
You're good on that. Yes.
Thanks. All right, thank you.
But if you do have any other questions or, want to review anything else, I'm happy to meet again or answer any specific questions that come up. But great. Anyone else? I know I've talked to all of the rest of you as well about specific projects, so may not have any more questions. Well, if you have no more questions, then we can call it a day. And again, I will send out a link to this recording and the slides so you guys can have all that you can share and refer to. And I will also be posting it on our website, so that can be accessed there as well.